Hi everyone, Sean Healy, change agent and relationship consultant here, and this is the Relationship Resourcing Series, a series designed to offer you support in having better quality business and personal relationships. So welcome to today's episode, which is around experiencing self-love. I think this is a really powerful area for us to become more and more aware of, because if we can connect to a sense of more deeply of our own value and our own preciousness, then it really starts to become a driving force to make change in a lot of areas in our life. So I really thought that I would look at this particular topic in this episode because, like I said, I feel that it is really a profound foundational thing, and I know how much I've struggled in my own life with being able to realize my own value and worth as a human being, my own sense of preciousness, and my own lovableness. So that's why I thought this episode would be something that you might find very helpful. One of the things that I find with the idea of people who want to experience more self-love, or maybe it's, greater sense of confidence or growing in your sense of self-trust, is that sometimes what happens is when we get an awareness that there's a gap in where, how we want to feel about ourselves internally, sometimes what we do to begin to cover off that gap is we'll lead off with the wrong type of question. We'll ask a how-based question, which can be helpful, but not necessarily the best question to ask. So allow me to give you an example of this. Please try this on for size. If I ask you, how do I learn to love myself more? Consider how that registers and what kind of thought process that begins to trigger for you. Then please consider option 2. When will I learn to love myself more? I would suggest that those two questions create very different internal processes. I'm not negating that there are certain experiences where we need to know how, but sometimes to create our deepest and most transformative change, the question when becomes so much more powerful. When will I be ready for this particular change? Because if we're talking about making an adjustment right at our core, sometimes when we're asking the question how, it teaches us these little techniques that refine the outside of our being, so to speak. When we ask the question when will I be ready to value myself more? When will I be able to love myself more? When that time comes, there can be a very deep shift right throughout the center of a person as they awaken to that realization. And then what we find is a whole series of elements of our life begin to just almost seem to automatically adjust. Suddenly, when I'm really connected and I have a deep realization about my value at a whole other level to what I experienced before, I find that, my self-care starts to change. I'm not doing it from a place of lack and resentment, but rather I'm coming at it from joy and fullness, because it's just what I deserve, what I have an expectation of for myself. I find that I don't have to work so hard on my boundary setting techniques, because when I set a boundary and an expectation with somebody and it's backed up through a resonant presence of greater value, I find that I have to stand up for myself a lot less, because I'm already radiating out a deeper sense of my own value, and that begins to change the way others deal with us. When I am in a sense of deeper value and a realization of deeper lovingness for myself, all of a sudden a whole series of expectations for myself and what I perceived as okay, there's suddenly a jump in the kind of system itself, and we begin to kind of settle in at a different place of balance across the system, and all of a sudden we find a whole series of behaviors start to emerge that are generated from that inner kind of adjustment, and bang, out come new techniques, new ways and behaviors of doing the world, rather than how do I make these adjustments. And so the center doesn't necessarily change. What we find is just a few small outer adjustments. What we're talking about is that radical realization of our value, of our worth, of our preciousness, some of the things that inadvertently were trained out of us as children. You know, that was not necessarily an intentional thing, just a byproduct sometimes of the family systems that we were raised in. People were doing the best they could with what they had, but sometimes we got strong messages not to be who we are, because that threatened the togetherness of the family. And so we're learning to reconnect, in essence, with what's always been there. If I ask the question, when will I learn to love myself more? It presupposes that that's already possible for me, that I already am. You know, it's just a realization that I am already innately valuable and precious. When I ask how, it sends me down a path of behavior and doing. And whilst I'm not negating, like I said, that how can be valuable, we're asking how questions, but we're also asking when questions. So if I give you an example from my own personal life, prior to my career in self-development, where I began was as a personal trainer. How I came to personal training was I'd had so many issues with my own weight, due to low self-esteem and very much other validated intimacy in my life, in that I really depended on what others thought of me and how they saw me. I tended to oscillate very radically in my weight. I've been probably what would be considered for an adult male dangerously underweight at certain stages, and I've been dangerously overweight at certain stages. I've been down as low as, I'm almost 6 foot. I like that. In reality, I'm 5'11". I like saying almost 6 foot. But I have been down as low as about 74 kilograms. At one stage, I've been up as high as 120 kilograms or there and abouts, being very overweight. And in the period where I took steroids, I was around about 92 kilograms. So I've ranged all over the place, mostly affected by the way I perceived others saw me, and driven from a place of lack and shame. But as a personal trainer, the issue, you know, and like I said, I've really oscillated in terms of my weight challenges throughout the course of life, and how that's affected my self-esteem, and largely based off how I've perceived others see me. So it certainly hasn't been self-validated and self-driven esteem, but rather other esteem, which is very, very fragile indeed, and probably another episode, to be perfectly honest. But my issues are not with how. I know how to lose weight. I know how to eat in a way that creates a certain body shape. I know the exercises to do. You know, how do I lose weight? It's not an issue for me. When will I be ready to lose weight is different, because one of the ways in which I protect and shield myself from the world and from intimacy at large is to put weight on. And so it's a question of when. When will I be able to know that it's okay for me to come to a place and a body shape that works for me, both in terms of something that I'm pleased with, but also that supports my health and well-being. You know, and it's about what resonates with me personally. If others like it, great. If they don't, that's okay too. And one of the consequences of, you know, getting to that place of when is, you know, suddenly I'm exposed to the idea of new relationships, and the fear that, you know, I've had some real challenges with my intimate relationships over the course of my life, and sometimes it's just been safer to keep weight on and to stay out of the dating kind of scene altogether. And sadly, my way of protecting myself is to deny myself love, and that's no protection at all, and in some ways is very, very dated. Rather than when we recognize, okay, I'm all right, regardless of what happens. You know, if a relationship works, fantastic. If it doesn't, it's okay. I'll grieve, I'll move through, I'll have my learnings, and then I'll move on. And I've got myself. I'm going to be okay. I can soothe myself through the pain. And when we come to that realization that we're okay and that we've got our own back, then I become ready for the win, you know, because at that point, I now become the person who is ready to experience self-love at a deeper level, and then the consequences that come from that. A very powerful question, I think, when we're asking the question, when am I ready to trust myself more? When am I ready to love myself more? When am I ready to recognize my essence and my value? Then we're looking too at what are the blocks that get in the way of that? Because sometimes we sort of go, wow, there's a whole new experience of myself that's waiting there for me to have, and yet I can't seem to step into that place yet. All right, then we're looking at what would the consequences be? What would the downside be of really stepping into our best self? What would be the downside of really loving myself at a whole other level of depth? Well, one of the downsides might be that I'm not so compliant, I'm not so controllable by people, you know, I'm not so agreeable, and people aren't necessarily going to enjoy that. If they enjoyed compliant, you know, nice guy act Sean, who just went along to get along because that's how he got his acceptance, and one consequence of really sitting more deeply in my own, in a recognition and an awakening of my own value and an experience of that at another level, means that suddenly I'm not going along with everything anymore. And there might be a period of adjustment for those around me to get used to the new way I'm showing up. So we might have to make some plans for what we perceive are the possible downside and then work through that. But whether we're denying a deeper realization of love or we're stepping into it, you know, if there's a denial and we're not ready yet to do that, there still is anxiety, there can still be abandonment. And if we are stepping into a deeper experience of who we are and our lovingness and value, there's still anxiety and there's still abandonment. But at least we're doing it on our own terms. And I happen to think we actually reduce the chance of being abandoned. We actually reduce the chance of being rejected by stepping into and having that deeper level experience. Hey, that's my view. I have no attachment on that, but I would certainly, if this is something that you want to do, please explore the downside of being the best you. By starting with the question, when will I be ready for the change I seek? And then what are the consequences, both the good and the possibly challenging consequences of really stepping in and owning that, because that will help us to increase our readiness to you know, bring forward the wenness of the change that we want to make. And I think that can be truly transformative, because we all really do deserve to experience a deeper level of lovingness and worth with ourselves. If you're already having those experiences, fantastic. But I really think that, you know, from making that change at the center, so much more can come to us in the course of our life. So I really hope that this has given you something to consider. And just before we finish off the episode, the other thing about this is sometimes I get very frustrated about where my life is at. And the first thing I need to realize is, you know, am I actually ready for what I want? Because not all my behaviors are consistent with that. And if I'm not ready yet to experience a deeper sense of lovingness for myself, then I don't need to belittle and punish myself for that. I just need to look at what's preventing and start working through that, and knowing that at some point I will be ready to be that kind of person. But what certainly doesn't help is that we punish ourselves if we're not quite ready for that experience. And some of us aren't, but I'm hoping at some stage you will be. And like I said, when are we ready? When are we ready to trust ourselves more? When are we ready to believe in ourselves more? When will we be ready to love ourselves more? And when are we ready for whatever else we perceive will add to a greater experience of living our life? So we're not doing away with the how questions, but we are adding in some when questions too, just to start to really get the back of the mind moving and generating some answers and some focuses from a different place. So I really hope you found today's episode helpful and that it makes some sense to you. I'm just aware of the sunspot suddenly. I hope that hasn't been too distracting. I didn't realize that the sun was shining through there. But as I say, I hope this has generated some food for thought, because I really do think that this is a foundational piece of consideration. And if we can awaken to a deeper sense of our own value, it goes a long way in terms of really shifting our experience both in personal and business relationships. So you're welcome, if you want to know more, to visit me at emergencetraining.com.au. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel, Sean Healy, the Relationship Resourcing Series. It just helps with the reach and the growth of this, and certainly check out the other episodes. I would definitely encourage you to do that, and you're welcome to reach out with any thoughts on episodes, any questions you may have. Really happy to have those kinds of conversations, and I'm delighted to kind of be doing this channel and sharing these things with others. And then, of course, you can also check out my podcast series, Sean Healy Tools, focuses on a lot of the same kinds of things. That's on iTunes, Stitcher, and Podbean for those of you who also enjoy listening to podcasts in your spare time. So thank you again. I really appreciate you tuning in and watching the episode. And until we see you again on the next one, bye for now.